today's video, I'm going to go over all the different methods that you can use to shoulder a heavy sandbag. Now, when you're first starting out with this stuff, technique isn't necessarily that important. If you're lifting a light enough sandbag, you can, for the most part, just kind of pick the thing up, set it on your lap, and without much thought, toss it up there and you're good. But once you start approaching heavier weights, say something well above your own body weight, it does become a bit more nuanced, and you might have to put a bit more time and energy towards perfecting one specific technique. So hopefully by laying these all out here for you, you can try each individual method until you find one that works for you, practice it over and over until you get good at it, and hopefully start shouldering some heavier things. One of my favorite things about this sport is there's no one specific technique that works best for everyone. If you look at the elite level where guys are shouldering, say, 300 plus pounds, they all do it just a bit different. So find that one method you like, practice it, and get to shouldering some heavy things.
Sandbag to shoulder method number 1 is the vertical lift from the lap. This is the method I believe everyone should start with. In many ways, it's the purest form of shouldering technique. There's no trick to it. The bag moves in a straight line from point A, the lap, to point B, the shoulder, and that's it. There's very minimal skill involved, which means if you have the strength, you should be able to brute force your way through it. This seems to be the method used by very naturally strong people. If you watch the top CrossFit guys, and yes, heavy sandbag to shoulder is part of CrossFit now, and it's actually pretty awesome, 9 out of 10 athletes use this vertical lifting technique. This method is also great if you use sandbags as a supplementary exercise for stone lifting, as it lets you focus on developing raw strength in the basic movement patterns. To perform the lift, rest the sandbag vertically on your lap and bear hug the thing. Take a deep breath and use your hips to drive the bag as high as you can up towards your shoulder. As I said before, the sandbag should move in a straight line from point A to point B. Depending on how heavy it is, you may throw the sandbag all the way up in one motion, or it might take you many small heaves to get it there. Regardless of how long it takes, be sure to maintain a solid brace and give it everything you have. The sandbag to shoulder technique I recommend you move on to next is the horizontal lift done with an over-under grip lifted to the opposite shoulder, aka the Mateusz method. In 2018, at the Arnold Strongman Classic, Mateusz Kieliszkowski performed one of the greatest feats of strength of all time when he shouldered a 410-pound stone 4 consecutive times in less than 2.5 minutes using this technique. Needless to say, it can be very effective. This is a great next step towards more technical variations as it gets you comfortable lifting with an underhand grip in a safe and repeatable way. If you come from the world of barbell lifting, this one may seem a bit scary at first. With barbells, an underhand grip with a bent elbow mixed with heavy lifting is usually a recipe for a torn bicep, but it doesn't quite work that way here. The best example I can give you for why this underhand grip is less dangerous than it may at first seem is the barbell Zercher squat. There are guys out there regularly squatting 600 plus pounds in a Zercher position, and their bicep tendons are just fine. The main difference with the sandbag is because it's bulkier, there will be some pressure placed on your forearm, which could lead to a lengthening of the bicep tendon under load if we're not careful, which is exactly what we don't want. For this reason, your main focus in this position should be on keeping the arm rigid. The elbow angle must remain constant at all times during the initial lifting phase. Once you understand this concept and practice it, you'll be surprised by how strong you actually are in this position. To perform the movement, rest the sandbag horizontally on your lap and place one arm over top and one arm underneath. You may need to rest the sandbag slightly off center, more towards the underhand side if it's not super long. From here, take a deep breath and again use your hips to drive the sandbag upwards. As you do this, your underhand arm will flip the sandbag upright towards the opposite shoulder. From here, complete the lift with as many heaves as is necessary. One last thing about this method, initially you may want to put everything you have into flipping the sandbag all the way to an upright position with that first lift from the lap, regardless of how high you can bring it. But eventually you may have more success if you try to time the flip so the sandbag reaches a completely vertical position right as it gets to the shoulder. Sandbag to shoulder method number 3 is exactly the same as method 2, but rather than flipping the bag to the opposite shoulder, you'll bring it to the shoulder on the same side as your underhand arm. As I said in the intro, no one method is correct, it all depends on the individual, and for some people, this method is much more efficient than flipping the bag all the way across the body. From what I've seen, and from personal experience, this method seems to work better if that first lift from the lap is a strong point for you, and you're able to bring the bag pretty high up on the chest straight away. You'll want to try timing the rotation of the sandbag from horizontal to vertical so it reaches that vertical position just as it gets to the shoulder. Sandbag to shoulder method number 4 adds another layer of skill to the mix and makes use of that underhand power we started building earlier with method 2. I first saw this one done by Andy Crawford, and it's my personal favorite technique. If you can get this one down and you connect with it, you'll find it puts you at a mechanical advantage during multiple parts of the lift. You'll be lifting off the lap with a double overhand grip, which can be very powerful, and you'll also make use of that rotation element, which for some is easier than going up in a completely straight line. To perform the movement, rest the sandbag horizontally on your lap and wrap both hands over top, out near the ends of the bag. Take a deep breath and drive upwards with your hips as hard as you can. Imagine you're trying to throw the thing up over your head. Once you reach max velocity and the bag starts falling back down, flip one of your arms underneath and catch it. From here, continue driving the sandbag upwards towards the shoulder on the side of the underhand arm. Again, try to time the rotation of the bag so it reaches vertical right as it gets to the shoulder. Sandbag to shoulder method number 5 takes method 4 and adds even more rotation. This time, once you toss the bag up and catch it with that over-under grip, continue driving and rotating upwards towards the opposite shoulder. This is probably about as technical as it gets for a lift from the lap, and I could see someone doing some pretty incredible things with this one. Sandbag to shoulder method number 6 again comes from Andy Crawford, and in my mind at least, is the Crawford technique. This method is the exact same as method number 4, but with an additional step. To perform this one, start with the sandbag resting horizontally on your lap and reach both arms over top. This time, rather than lifting as explosively as you can from the lap, simply stand up with the bag while maintaining that double overhand grip. From here, with the next heave, drive the sandbag up and bring one arm underneath. At this point, bring the sandbag up to the shoulder on the underhand side while, again, timing rotation so the bag reaches vertical as it gets to the shoulder. This method has allowed Andy to shoulder sandbags well above 350 pounds and seems to work very well for him. The genius of this approach is in that first lift. If a bag is too bulky, or if you don't have the power to drive it up high enough off the lap to bring one arm underneath, this method may help. Adding this initial step before switching grips may also land the sandbag higher up on the chest than if you went for the grip switch right away. If the bag starts in that horizontal over-under position higher up, that means you have less distance to travel to the shoulder, and you'll be more likely to get it. As with the last few methods before this, sandbag to shoulder method number 7 is the exact same as number 6, but you rotate the sandbag to the opposite shoulder. Once again, everything depends on you as an individual. Maybe this method will be easier for you, maybe it won't. You'll never know until you try. Here's a method I didn't think about before. I've never actually seen anyone do this one, but I'm sure you could use it, so I'm going to add it in here. It's the same as the last one, but rather than starting with the double overhand, we're going to start with that over-under grip. So you have the over-under. From here, just stand up as normal, and then you can start throwing it up. Just like that. And then, of course, you can also do it to the opposite shoulder by doing even more rotation. So starting over-under, just stand up, and then start flipping it to the other side. Sandbag to shoulder methods 8 and 9 will be grouped together here, as they're almost identical aside from one minor difference. This technique starts with the sandbag resting horizontally on the lap and is closely related to a one-motion lift, which we'll get into later. Grab the sandbag with either a double overhand grip or grab the outsides of the bag so your palms are facing inwards, and this is the difference between methods 8 and 9 grip placement. From here, drive upwards as explosively as you can while rotating one side of the bag upwards. This should bring the sandbag almost all the way to the shoulder. At this point, reach one arm underneath and push the sandbag into position. This one requires immense strength and power, and the best example I found is from Corey Rockwell, aka Mooseville Strong. One thing I should clarify with this method, don't focus too much on that press or push part that I mentioned at the end there. You could just as easily heave or toss the sandbag up the rest of the way if you need to. The main point with this method is to simultaneously bring the thing up as high as you can and twist it at the same time so it lands close or all the way up onto your shoulder in one movement. That's going to be it for sandbag to shoulder methods from the lap. There are other methods out there, I'm sure, but none I've seen that translate to very heavy sandbags. You could, for example, do something like a double underhand grip, but I doubt you'll lift anything too heavy that way. I should also mention that there is room for variation within each of these methods. One person might have more success bringing the bag further off center, or changing grip positions, or rotating at a different time, or focusing on different parts of the movement. I like to put everything I have into that first lift off the lap, but others may have more success focusing on the second or third or fourth heaves. Your exact method will end up uniquely yours once you perfect it. There are also always exceptions to each of these. Take Bryce, the unknown strongman, for example. His strength off the ground is so far above everything else that he has more success shouldering heavy things if he just skips the lap phase altogether. There's also variations in breathing patterns. I like to do the whole thing in one breath, others like to reset and breathe multiple times on the way up. Only you can say what's best for you. Before we end the video, there is one final sandbag to shoulder method we should talk about. Number 10, the one motion. The goal with the one motion is to bring a sandbag all the way from the ground to the shoulder in one continuous movement. If you want to do this with anything heavy, there is a very specific technique you should use. Start with the bag horizontally on the ground and grab the outsides, palms facing inwards. Take a deep breath and brace. Without changing the torso angle, row the sandbag to your chest. Once you have just about reached the chest, explosively extend the hips to drive the sandbag upwards while rotating one side of the bag so it ends up vertically over the shoulder. This is the most technical shouldering method by far, but once you manage it, the feeling is unmatched. I still believe the one motion sandbag to shoulder is the ultimate display of total body power. Andy and I made an entire video on this if you'd like to hear more about it. I'll link it in the description below. You may be thinking, what about a one motion with the sandbag starting in a vertical position on the ground? This is possible, but only with relatively lighter sandbags. Still cool, no doubt, but once a bag gets heavy enough, this method becomes obsolete as it will run into your body on the way up. There are also techniques for one motioning heavy weights from the lap by slowly rolling the object upwards, but this is less common with sandbags and is usually seen with stones. And that's it, every method I've been able to find for shouldering a heavy sandbag. If you have a technique I didn't mention, please let me know because I'm obsessed and I want to try it out. Also let me know how this whole thing is going for you. Right now, if you search for sandbag to shoulder on YouTube, most of what comes up is still lightweight cardio stuff. Nothing wrong with that, of course, but I have hope that one day we'll see many more people shouldering heavy things, and your comments let me know I'm on the right track. So, as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.